Hello, I'm here to talk today about climate change and adaptation practices on Northwest rangelands. Many of us are aware that rangelands support a variety of ecosystem services. Ecosystem services in rangelands in the Northwest, that is Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, have an estimated annual value of more than 1.2 billion US dollars. These services include sage-grouse habitat, water filtration, and carbon sequestration. These rangelands also help to support the agricultural industry. For example, approximately 29,000 beef cattle ranches and farms generate 1.7 billion US dollars in gross revenue annually. A majority of this is from cattle and calf sales. Preparing these important resources for today and into the future is really the key issue here, and I hope we can continue to take opportunities like these Workshop Wednesdays for Oregon growers to learn from each other on how to support climate resilience. Today I'll be providing information from a synthesis about climate change effects and adaptation opportunities on Northwest rangelands. My name is Anna Maher, and my research position is supported by the U.S. Forest Service and the Northwest Climate Hub. The Northwest Climate Hub serves Alaska as well, but the information today is focused on Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, as that's where the majority of the rangelands in the Northwest are. My co-authors on this synthesis have a diverse set of backgrounds, from wildlife biology to extensive rangeland fire ecology research to plant evolutionary ecology, forest and fire ecology, and also specialists in climate change vulnerability assessments. My background is in natural resource economics and rangeland ecology and management. Through our diverse set of backgrounds, we strive to bring you with information that is actionable and relevant to your day-to-day work. Based on the synthesis work by our team, today I will walk us through important rangeland vulnerabilities to climate change effects and make connections to specific climate change adaptation practices. Let's start with an overview of vulnerabilities. The Northwest is a mix of rangeland, shown in yellow, and forest, shown in green. Much of the rangelands in the Northwest are shrublands, such as sagebrush steppe, and semi-arid, cold desert. These rangelands are a critical component of our Northwest economy and way of life. They support rangeland livelihoods and communities, cultural values and traditions. In addition, many wildlife species, including the iconic greater sage-grouse, depend upon these vast, relatively unfragmented expanses of rangeland for their survival. Presently, rangelands support wildlife while being an important grazing resource in the region to produce livestock. Cattle production specifically utilizes an estimated total of 47 million acres in the Northwest. Approximately half of these 47 million acres are estimated to be in Oregon, and approximately 3/4 of these acres are estimated to be publicly owned, making public-private partnerships an essential part of the work we do to promote sustainable rangelands. Climate adaptation is therefore about protecting rangelands and their ability to support this array of critical ecosystem services across ownerships. Many of us may be getting the feeling that times are changing. There have been several large fires over the last decade or so, many of which have affected critical sage-grouse habitat. Fire size is changing, and these fires can precipitate large flushes of invasive annual grasses that can result in reburns. Invasive annual grasses have increased substantially this century. Here we see the percent cover in herbaceous annual grasses for the entirety of Oregon, Idaho, and Washington. This map is overlaid with critical habitat for sage-grouse. The red irregular blobs represent that critical habitat, and then the blue outline along the color is the sage-grouse biome. Many of us are aware of the impacts of invasive grass fire cycles, the most famous one being cheatgrass. Climate change is expected to exacerbate this problem with invasive annual grasses, not only through increased risk of fire supporting invasive grasses, but also through decreased resilience of native perennials. In addition to these existing issues, area burned is projected to increase with temperature increases. This is an estimate of the increase in area burned with a 1 degree increase in temperature. In the center of this screen, areas in yellow indicate a doubling or tripling of burn area. Note that the forested areas surrounding these rangelands, shown in yellow, have a much greater increase in projected area burned. This indicates that this effect may be particularly important for rangeland areas adjacent to forests. Fire size, annual burn area, invasive annual grasses. What else is changing? Decreasing snowpack is an important climate change concern in the Northwest, as this is our natural water reservoir for water we need during the end of the summer. In this diagram, the red circles show declines in snowpack are already occurring in much of the Northwest. This is likely to exacerbate water and vegetation concerns during the summer months and during more extreme dry times. Overall, most rangeland areas in the Northwest are projected to become warmer and drier. There are concerns because of these issues in terms of heat for livestock, for example, also shortened grazing seasons. Drought leads to earlier forage browning. There's also been evidence of changing phenology leading to earlier forage greenup and unfortunately much earlier browning of forage. Third, changing species composition is of concern. For example, going from native bunch grasses to cheatgrass means forage will dry out earlier and or less forage will be available later in the summer. Because of these issues, there's also concern that streams and rivers will be much lower later in the summer, and that livestock and wildlife will be more apt to be seeking refuge there at the same time, making riparian areas particularly vulnerable. This is showing an example of mid-century projections of stream flow changes for a river in Prineville, Oregon. The top black line is typical stream flow, and the bottom lines are projections based on 2 different climate change emission scenarios. Because of these many issues, investment in upland water sources and shade and riparian health may all be needed, as well as additional drought and fire planning. Which brings us to, how can we get ahead of these impacts? That's really what we need to figure out here. Implementing for yourself or offering climate change adaptation practices to the people that you work with can help to proactively reduce impacts from things like extreme events such as drought and wildfire. So we have these 2 major vulnerabilities. There are definitely others as well, but just to boil it down, fire and dryness. And these are somewhat related issues, right? Which means, for one, we need to ensure that diverse plant communities can recover after periodic fire by preparing the land for fire. Second, we need to find ways to decrease impacts from more intense dry times by supporting hydrological function. Getting more specific in terms of strategy, Given the multitude of factors occurring, minimizing fire severity prior to invasive annual grass dominance is going to be key. As we talked about, fires can wipe out sagebrush vegetation over large areas and precipitate huge increases in invasive annual grasses, leading to grass fire cycles. Specific practices related to this strategy include planning and preparing for greater burn area. This includes managing for large areas to promote defendable fire breaks and fuel reduction strategies. Second, considering fuel treatments, especially after high production years, and anticipating wildfire risks due to impending or existing drought. Another area for preparation is drought. One strategy is to retain soil moisture for native shrubs, forbs, and grasses. This is an example with managing for pinyon juniper expansion, which is increasingly important in the presence of extreme droughts, increasing evaporative demand due to increasing temperatures, and also reduced seasonal soil moisture as a result of reduced snowpack. One study of Central Oregon modeled projected climate change impacts and found that juniper treatments in cool, moist sagebrush steppe substantially reduced the rate of juniper encroachment, particularly when prioritized early in the century. Another strategy for drought preparation includes retaining and improving perennial vegetation and healthy soils to improve water holding capacity. Some examples specifically could be maintaining soil organic matter and plant vigor and diversity. For example, planting climate adaptive native grasses as a preventative measure may be important but might be most feasible on smaller scales like private lands. Another practice to consider is managing the distribution, timing, and intensity and duration of grazing. This comes up in the literature a lot. However, it likely requires investment in many things like infrastructure and labor, such as fencing or virtual fencing or range riders, water resources, piping systems, and upland vegetation monitoring, as well as longer-term planning for things like investment in water resources. So, for example, one resource I read said the NEPA process for water tanks can take 3 to 5 years. So that would be an important issue on public lands. All of these ideas point to an increased need for drought and fire planning. I've provided here some sample drought plans. These plans are not specific to the Northwest, but our partners are working on specific examples for the Northwest, so please keep in contact as that evolves. The second bullet point there is an example of a co-produced drought plan and how to bring those plans about, which involves public agencies as well as private producers to create plans. The third bullet point there is that in talking to rangeland managers in the Northwest, it has been brought to our attention that it's not just drought planning that we need, it's also fire planning. So the plans of the near future will likely be a combination of drought and fire planning to support climate resilience. Just additional climate adaptation strategies include utilizing online tools, which can be important for this planning effort, and also adjustments throughout the year. This is just an example of one online tool that can provide specific information in terms of risks of invasive annual grasses in your area. There are many online tools, and I provided a list of these, of a subset of these to Ashley, the organizer of this workshop. And within the next month, there'll be a very useful resource, a list of more extensive list of online tools available for your management. So please feel free to reach out to me about that. The final example that I want to bring to your attention is collaborative projects. If you can get involved in collaborative projects, they can be important for sharing knowledge as well as cost sharing. And this is an example of in the Blue Mountains of Eastern Oregon. I'm happy to provide you more information about this project as well as other projects in the region. In summary, issues impacting rangelands are not likely to be temporary. Several factors are coming together on this, making your advising and management more important than ever. As rangeland management issues in the Northwest are growing and becoming increasingly complex, there is an increased sense of urgency. But on a positive note, by recognizing the situation and taking proactive steps, we can reduce risk and even potentially thrive and/or help others thrive in the years to come. Thank you again for your dedication to rangeland sustainability in the Northwest through climate resilience and for joining me today.